Welcome back to the history of Final Fantasy. In Part 1, we covered the first three titles, Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy II, and Final Fantasy III. As I mentioned then, Final Fantasy II and III were not released in America, which led to some confusion when later games were rebranded as 2 and 3. In this part, I will go into more detail with this. After the success of Final Fantasy III, Square started work on not one, but two sequels, another 8-bit Famicom title, Final Fantasy IV, and a 16-bit Super Famicom title, Final Fantasy V. Due to the long development process and the decline of the Famicom, however, Squaresoft canceled 4, and to this day a screenshot of it shown in a Japanese gaming magazine is the only proof the game ever existed. Final Fantasy V was therefore rebranded as Final Fantasy IV, not the first time it would be rebranded. The game was Squaresoft's first foray into the 16-bit realm of Final Fantasy, and though the gameplay remains similar, the graphics are much more vibrant, detailed, and colorful, and there is use of the Super Famicom's Mode 7 graphics. Gameplay-wise and story-wise, the game is somewhat of a compromise between Final Fantasy II and III. Like in II, all of the characters were predefined with their own personalities, and would leave and join the party throughout the quest according to the game's plot. The job system from III makes a return in a ways, as each character has a defined job. However, the player is not offered any choice. For example, the character Tellah will always be a sage, and the character Kain will always be a dragoon. The only character to change class was the game's main character, Cecil Harvey, who goes from being a Dark Knight to being a Paladin. The total roster was expanded from 4 to 5 characters, though as the party was constantly changing, there was not always 5 characters in the group, sometimes as few as 2. The game's story has to do with Cecil's redemption. As a Dark Knight, he is forced to commit murderous acts for the Kingdom of Baron, not knowing that the king is long dead and an impostor sits on the throne. After discovering the villain Golbez has taken control of Baron, and is trying to dominate the world with 8 crystals, Cecil becomes a paladin, a force of good, and attempts to recover the crystals and destroy Golbez. Later in the game, it turns out Golbez was a pawn of Zemus, and the party even travels to the moon to confront the villain. Final Fantasy IV, like II, had a big emphasis on storytelling, and was immediately popular in Japan. It was also noted for its difficulty, drawing it comparisons to Final Fantasy II. The game also introduced an important gameplay system, the ATB, or Active Time Battle System, which gave each character a meter that would slowly fill. When it fills, the character could then attack or do a different action, such as using an item or spell. This would give battles some immediacy and excitement. The ATB system would remain the standard in Final Fantasy games, as well as many other Squaresoft RPGs, throughout the rest of the 16-bit and 32-bit eras. Final Fantasy IV was the first game to be localized to America since the original game, and therefore it was rebranded as Final Fantasy II. This was especially believable to American gamers, as the game contained large amounts of references to the first game, something from obvious things like the 4 elemental fiends, to subtle things like collecting a rat's tail. It was not for years later, upon the advent of the Internet, that American gamers discovered the ruse. The American version changed more than the title, however. The game's difficulty was also toned down greatly, and numerous aspects were censored, including violent imagery, suggestive themes, and religious references. As much as Final Fantasy IV acts as a refined and polished version of Final Fantasy II, the next game in the series, Final Fantasy V, would have much in common with Final Fantasy III. V returned to certain series staples, such as only having 4 party members, a job system that could be customized throughout the game, and a more straightforward story, with the game's emphasis being on character growth and customization. Final Fantasy V featured a static cast of 4 characters, Bartz, Lena, Faris, and Galuf. The only change in the lineup happens when Galuf dies and is replaced by his granddaughter Krill. The gameplay is similar to Final Fantasy III, where characters travel throughout the game world seeking out crystals which give you more jobs. New to this series was the ability to master a job and permanently gain the abilities and equip them to other jobs. For example, a character who plays as a knight may gain the ability to wield a weapon with both hands, striking with much more power. This ability could then be transferred to another job, such as a thief. You could also choose to revert to the base freelancer class at any time, giving you the ability to equip 2 abilities rather than just 1. With 4 characters and over 20 jobs to choose from, it led to nearly endless customization.